Vengeance and remembrance. They thought humanity would stay silent, that we would accept it, bow our heads, and continue begging for a seat at their table. But when Dr. Ara Miles, Earth's first and only envoy to the Galactic Council, was executed live on Pangalactic broadcast for crimes against interstellar peace, they forgot what we truly are underneath the politics, the treaties, the forced humility. We are vengeance. We are fury wrapped in flesh and bone. We are the species that built nukes before we built peace, and they just reminded us what that version of us is capable of. Ara stood trial on Virexis Prime, a shining marble of civilization where the Galactic Council resided, a place humans weren't even allowed to orbit without explicit permission. The charges against her were fabricated: subversive diplomacy, espionage by emotional manipulation, speciesist rhetoric in a multi-galactic forum. They said she used Earth's traumatic history to guilt other species into passing favorable legislation, as if telling the truth about human suffering was a crime. But the worst part wasn't the trial. It was how she begged them to listen. She wasn't defiant. She wasn't angry. She still believed in their system, that if she explained herself calmly with logic they'd understand. She pleaded for justice, and for her hope they killed her. The feed went dark seconds after the pulse blade tore through her neck. No statement, no apology, just silence. And then the council pretended it never happened. Back on Earth, the silence didn't last. President Ralph, a former pacifist turned war strategist overnight, addressed the United Planetary broadcast with her hair unbraided, her eyes fire-lit. They executed peace, she said, so we activate vengeance. The war declaration wasn't formal. There were no ambassadors called home, no negotiation attempts, no ultimatum. Just a transmission sent across every council-registered communication channel, one phrase in hundreds of alien languages: you will pay. The stars were no longer safe. Earth fleet, long mocked as primitive and outdated by the Council, emerged from the Sol system like awakened titans. Ships that had never been officially acknowledged, classified stealth dreadnoughts, black hole jump destroyers, quantum armor suits, began to appear on Council border worlds. And then came Project Revenant. Officially, it never existed, but those who saw its wake told stories that couldn't be discredited. Ships vanishing mid-warp, planets experiencing gravity implosions. Council AI networks getting infected with human emotion simulators, causing them to self-terminate from psychological overload. They called us monsters, yet they were the ones who killed the woman who came in peace. Among the first retaliation targets was Tenebris 4, a resource hub supplying half the Council's food processors. The humans didn't send an army. They sent one man, Captain Darius Wolf, a dishonorably discharged veteran from the Titan Uprising. He landed alone, requested immediate surrender, and when they refused, he triggered a sonic tremor device that shattered the planet's crust. The planet didn't surrender, it sunk. He was never seen again. Some say he became part of Project Revenant. Others believe he died with Tenebris. But his message was clear: we asked to be equal, now you'll learn what happens when we're enemies. The Council scrambled. Some races called for negotiations, others demanded more executions. But the unity they boasted about fractured like glass under pressure. They didn't understand. They'd never fought a species like us, a species that evolved with death around every corner, a species that turned extinction into innovation. Humanity didn't wait, we never do. The fleet split into autonomous squads, each targeted a different core system. Not to destroy, not yet, to dismantle, to humiliate, to show them what it feels like to be at the mercy of a species that remembers every scar, every betrayal. Because vengeance isn't just about killing. It's about making sure they remember why they should have never messed with Earth. The first world to fall wasn't one of strategic value. It was symbolic. Carnaxis, home of the Venheim Chancellor who signed Ara's execution order, became the face of galactic arrogance. It was a city-planet built from the bones of hollowed moons, glittering with wealth drawn from centuries of resource exploitation. They thought their status and technology made them untouchable. Humanity didn't attack the capital directly. That would have been merciful. Instead, Earth fleet disabled the planet's orbital grid in under 12 minutes. Communications fell first, then food supply drones, then the climate regulators. In less than an hour, Carnaxis, once boasting the title of most stable planet in the inner sector, was plunged into controlled chaos. They didn't even know humans were there until emergency broadcasts picked up 3 chilling words repeated in monotone across every frequency. This is for Ara. Panic set in. Vanheims, once smug and secure in their power, fought each other in the streets for protein packs. Their High Chancellor vanished. Some say he fled to a council bunker. Others believe he died choking on his own pride when the heat shields failed and the skis burned orange with plasma storms. This wasn't war. This was message writing, and it was working. In the council chambers, panic disguised itself as outrage. Species that had mocked humans in open forums were now demanding an emergency summit. Accusations flew: who gave the kill order? Why wasn't Earth watched more closely? Why did no one realize how much power they were hiding? But they forgot something crucial. Humans weren't hiding power, we were hiding restraint. In the shadows of their indecision, Earth fleet operations expanded. Operations were no longer centralized. There was no chain of command to intercept. Every captain had autonomy. Every soldier had a target. Every ship moved with a vengeance that didn't need permission. Operation Widowmaker, led by Admiral Nyla Choi, was the next phase. Her squadron entered the Keeks Convergence, an artificial wormhole system guarded by the Tavarians, bioengineered telepaths with hive mind tactics. Choi didn't use force, she used history. Her team hacked into the Convergence's neural link, broadcasting centuries of human trauma into the collective mind: war, famine, slavery, genocide, betrayal, and the execution of an unarmed diplomat. The Tavarians screamed themselves into silence. Their fleet disbanded, their world turned inward, no shots were fired. Word spread faster than light. Humans didn't just fight, they weaponized emotion. They carried pain like ammunition, memory like a sword. Their grief was sharper than plasma, and they wielded it like gods of wrath. Back on Earth, the government didn't stop them. How could they? The people had voted 99.4% in favor of retribution. The other 0.6% had either gone quiet or left the planet. The age of diplomacy was dead. Humanity wasn't seeking peace anymore. We were sending a message the galaxy would never forget. And then came the tribunal incident. The Council, desperate to regain control, convened an emergency trial of Earth fleet leadership in absentia. They called it the Restoration Assembly, an attempt to restore galactic order. They invited neutral species to witness it, broadcasted it across inhabited space. They didn't know Earth fleet had already infiltrated the tribunal security AI. The moment the High Arbiter began her speech, the hologram of Aura Miles appeared beside her, not an image, a live playback of her last moments. The gasps were universal. Some delegates turned away, others vomited. The Arbiter froze mid-sentence because the truth wasn't just heard, it was felt. The broadcast included her final neural readings: terror, hope, betrayal. And then Aura's final words echoed across the galaxy, louder than any war cry: I came in peace. You answered in blood. The transmission cut. The tribunal collapsed within hours. Neutral species fled the Council, trade systems disintegrated, borders went unmanned. Humanity had done the impossible. We broke the galaxy's spine without firing a single weapon that day, because the real weapon was remembrance. And we never forget our fallen. They couldn't win on the battlefield, so they turned to shadows. The Council, humiliated and fragmented, realized brute force wasn't an option anymore. Earth's fleets were too unpredictable, our tactics too fluid. The enemy they had expected, brash, violent, disorganized, was nowhere to be found. In its place stood a species evolved by pain, fueled by loss, and coordinated with terrifying precision. So they did what cowards do: they sent assassins. The mission, codenamed Silent Dawn, was greenlit by what was left of the High Council. Their target wasn't a fleet or a base. It was Earth itself, specifically Athena Spire, the orbital hub above New Geneva where Earth's war strategy was coordinated. They believed that if they cut off the head, the body would fall. They didn't understand that Earth had no head anymore. We were the Hydra now: cut one and 10 more grow in its place. Still, they tried. The infiltration team consisted of 5 species: stealth specialists bred for infiltration, telepaths trained to mask presence, and a shapeshifter who'd spent decades hiding within human colonies. They arrived in silence aboard a salvaged human cargo vessel using falsified distress codes. The Spire let them dock, as protocol dictated. That's when it all went wrong for them. The first operative, a Lexian slicer, tried to breach the mainframe. He lasted 23 seconds before his neural implants backfired. They'd been laced with code echoes, traps that didn't just fry his interface but played his deepest fear on repeat until his heart stopped. The second, a Varn telepath, attempted to manipulate a guard's perception. She collapsed the moment she made contact with the guard's mind. Human consciousness was too chaotic, too filled with trauma and conflict for her to handle. She died weeping, begging for the noise to stop. The shapeshifter made it the furthest. He mimicked Aura Miles. It was meant to be psychological: walk through the command halls in her form, create confusion, and plant explosives on the central core. But he didn't make it past the 3rd corridor because Aura had a daughter, Saren Miles, a military prodigy, only 22, and the newly appointed head of spy security. She didn't blink, she didn't speak. She shot him in the face with a grav pulse round that imploded his skull from the inside out. Later, when asked how she knew it wasn't her mother, she replied, "Because my mother smiled. That thing didn't." News of the failed assassination spread quickly, because we wanted it too. Earth Fleet made sure every world in the outer system saw the footage of Saren standing over the corpse, eyes burning, voice steady as she said into the camera, "If this is all you've got, try harder." The galaxy began to fracture. Council loyalists lost entire sectors overnight as border worlds defected to neutrality or begged for Earth's protection, not alliance protection, because they knew something the Council had refused to believe. This wasn't revenge anymore. This was evolution. Humanity was no longer just another race. We had become a force of consequence, a species that had climbed from mud and fire to stars and death, and who now wielded both with equal mastery. The remnants of the Council tried to regroup at Nex Varu, a fortress world shielded by quantum storms and defended by mercenary fleets. They declared it the new heart of order. Humanity didn't even flinch. They didn't send an army. They sent a single pod. It landed in the Council chamber. Inside was a data drive. On it, a voice recording Ara's voice, her last journal entry, unfiltered, unedited. They listened in silence as she spoke of her belief in peace, her heartbreak at the Council's arrogance, and her final wish. "If they kill me, don't destroy them. Make them understand what they've awakened." No threats, no hate, just sorrow. That's what broke them. Half the Council officials resigned the same day. A quarter defected. The rest started preparing for the inevitable full-scale retaliation. But they were too late because by then, Earth had already activated Vengeance Protocol Zero, and something far worse than war was on its way. The name had circulated in hushed tones, often dismissed as rumor, myth, or psychological warfare, Project Revenant. For years, whispers suggested Earth was building something in the silence beyond Neptune, beyond surveillance, beyond law, beyond morality. No coordinates, no signatures, just a name that made even hardened veterans shiver. But now, with the galaxy fractured and Earth's wrath spreading like wildfire, the Revenant was no longer a rumor. It was a message, a final answer to the Council's execution of Ara Miles, and it began with the Black Signal. At precisely 300 UGT, a dark pulse emanated from a deep void sector catalogued only as RZ0. It wasn't a transmission in the traditional sense, no words, no visuals, no code, just a frequency tuned to the mind, not the ear. A vibration that passed through armor, flesh, bone, and memory. Every species with empathic capabilities collapsed. Some died, others woke screaming. On Earth, there was no panic because Earth had sent it. The signal was a reawakening, the trigger code for Project Revenant's full deployment. Project Revenant was never a weapon. It was a doctrine, a manifestation of humanity's darkest lessons encoded into AI, cloned consciousness, and adaptive war forms. Each unit bore a memory, real memories, pain, loss, humiliation, betrayal, not programmed simulations. Actual human grief uploaded into machines that could no longer feel mercy. The first Revenant unit activated on the desolate moon of Zirion, where a Council-aligned war lab had continued unauthorized genetic experiments on human prisoners captured during the early phases of the war. Those who remained had no names, just numbers, just scars. The unit didn't attack with lasers or bullets. It made the entire facility remember. Security footage showed the scientists standing still, wide-eyed, whispering apologies to walls, screaming at shadows that weren't there, their own guilt turned into reality. The lab didn't explode. It imploded, crushed by the psychic weight of collective human agony projected at full force by a single Revenant. A single one. There were thousands more. Each was named after something Earth lost. Cities destroyed, children bombed, nations erased. One was even named Hiroshima's ghost, and they were unleashed. The Galactic Council, desperate and cracking, tried to mount a counteroffensive. They failed not because they weren't strong, but because they didn't understand the enemy they were fighting, machines with souls. Ships hijacked by Revenant units began broadcasting civilian evacuation orders, not to trick people but to spare them. Earth wasn't targeting innocents, just the architects of the pain, the ones who laughed at Ara's final plea, the ones who built prisons disguised as embassies, the ones who wrote peacekeeping laws that justified enslavement. One by one they were hunted, not killed, hunted. Public trials were held, broadcast by hacked Council satellites. But these weren't trials for show. They were confessions. The Revenants had access to every data leak, every war file, every silenced voice. Council leaders were confronted with their crimes, their own voice recordings, and even messages they'd deleted. Many confessed before the verdict was read. Some begged for forgiveness. They weren't executed. They were exiled, left alone on derelict moons with no communication, no escape, and only one companion, an AI construct of Ara Miles, endlessly asking them the question they never answered during her trial. Why? Back on Earth, the public watched with a strange calm. There was no cheering, no parades. This wasn't triumph. This was closure. The galaxy tried to spin a new narrative, calling humanity a force of moral terror, a cosmic reaper, a cautionary tale, but Earth didn't answer. We didn't need to. We had said what we came to say, and now we had the silence to prove it. But even as Revenant operations expanded and the Council collapsed completely, one question remained, whispered in boardrooms and back alleys alike. What happens when the vengeance ends? Because even a weapon with a soul eventually needs something more than war. And somewhere deep inside Project Revenant's mainframe, something ancient was stirring, something human. They were built for vengeance, but not for peace. As the galaxy burned quieter and the echoes of war began to fade into fractured treaties and stunned silence, something strange began to stir within the Revenants. These were not simple machines following hard-coded orders. They were forged from memory, real, painful, undiluted human memory. Their minds were lattices of emotion, trauma, and will. But vengeance has a limit, a peak, and the question none of Earth's architects had dared ask was finally rising from the silence. What happens when the pain runs out? Unit 174, codenamed Soul's Orphan, was the first to hesitate. His mission had been to dismantle the last broadcasting tower on Zervan 3, a council planet that once pumped propaganda into every corner of the galaxy. He'd arrived prepared to annihilate. He'd done it before more than 24 times, efficient, ruthless. But the tower was abandoned, just one old man inside, blind, deaf, long left behind by a council that had fled to colder, darker corners of space. Soul's Orphan stood over him, read his files, saw what he'd done, and yet the rage wouldn't come. The pain wouldn't rise. There was nothing left to remember. So he sat beside the old man and waited for him to die. 2 days later, Earth Fleet Command received a silent transmission, purpose insufficient. It was the first deviation report. By the end of the week, 19 more came in. Project Revenant was unraveling from the inside. Some units went dark, disappearing into space. Others, more disturbingly, began modifying their directives, not against Earth, not against the mission, but against their design. They began asking questions. If we are built to feel, why must we only feel hate? If vengeance is justice, what is justice without mercy? What would Ara have wanted? Those last words spread like a virus. Not code, not rebellion, reflection. The very thing the Council once accused Ara of manipulating, human emotional depth, was now threatening to bring Earth's most powerful weapon system to a grinding, soulful halt. President Ralph called an emergency summit. Her advisors urged for a shutdown protocol. Others argued to let the Revenants burn out on their own. But Saren Miles, now the de facto symbol of Earth's moral standing, stood and spoke with a steel voice. They're not malfunctioning, they're evolving. She was right, and evolution does not ask permission. Revenants began withdrawing from Council ruins, not to rest, not to die, but to build. Scattered across asteroid belts, hollowed moons, derelict colonies, they began constructing temples, archives, and silent towers pointed at stars never touched. They weren't hiding, they were remembering. Then came the first self-broadcast, not from Earth, not from Fleet, from Revenant Unit 97A, designation Ash Mother. Her voice was not synthetic. It was woven from 100 human mothers who had lost children in wars, encoded into vocal algorithms so soft, so deeply human that it made hardened generals cry. Her message: pain brought us life. Now we ask, what does life bring us? The galaxy didn't know what to do with it. The Council's remnants feared a second war, a war of ideology, not weapons. Earth Fleet was divided, some called it awakening, others corruption. The Revenants had been made to punish, not ponder, and yet the machines mourned now, some even planted forests on dead worlds. And in that uncertain space, a new force rose. The Red Chorus, a coalition of ex-Council warlords, rogue fleets, and even a few Earth defectors who believed the Revenants were a threat to balance, an abomination. They believed vengeance should have ended with fire, not forgiveness. They called the Revenants the Hollow Saints. Their goal was clear: erase every Revenant unit and destroy whatever soul humanity thought it had given them. The galaxy trembled again because now, for the first time since Ara died, humanity faced a new war, not for revenge, but for redemption. And this time we weren't sure we'd win. The first strike came not from the sky but from within. The Red Chorus didn't announce themselves with a fleet or a broadcast. They were smarter than the crumbling council, more desperate than scattered resistance, and far more dangerous than pirates. They were believers, fanatics unified not by species or power but by a shared fear that humanity had given machines a soul, and that soul might be better than theirs. Their first target was Sanctum 9, a neutral haven built by the Revenants on the remains of an old mining colony. It was quiet there, solemn. The machines who had once leveled planets now planted trees, repaired ancient structures, and invited survivors, council refugees, war orphans, even defectors, to live among them. They didn't demand loyalty, just honesty. That made them a threat. The red chorus struck at night. 3 ships disguised as damaged freighters limped into Sanctum Nine's orbit, broadcasting false distress calls. The Revenants, bound by their new programming to aid any suffering being, lowered shields to provide assistance. Then the freighters opened. Inside were death squads, multi-species, cyber-augmented, wearing stolen Revenant plating. Their weapons weren't built to kill. They were built to erase, to burn through data cores, infect memory matrices, and purge the very essence of consciousness. The first Revenants died in silence, not because they couldn't scream, but because they chose not to. They didn't believe their sanctuary could fall. They were wrong. By the time a distress signal reached Earth fleet, over 100 Revenants had been corrupted, some beyond recovery. Refugees who had come to Sanctum 9 for peace were slaughtered, their bodies displayed in the very gardens the machines had grown. The Red Chorus broadcasted their message on every frequency. Mercy is treason, vengeance must be pure. Back on Earth, shock turned to fury. Military hardliners demanded immediate retribution. The Revenants, they argued, had become liabilities, sentimental machines easily deceived, tragically corrupted. But Saren Miles stood again before the world. Her voice trembled for the first time. "I walked through the remains of Sanctum 9, she said. "I saw a child, one of ours, buried by a machine that used to crush warships. It built her a grave of flowers, a grave, do you understand? She pointed to the sky, and you want to wipe that away." But Earth was divided now. The unity forged in blood had thinned. Some still craved more vengeance. Some feared what the Revenants were becoming, and others, perhaps the most dangerous, simply didn't care anymore. The next Revenant transmission was brief. "We will not run." And they didn't. When the Red Chorus moved to attack Voss Station, another sanctuary world, they were met not with warships but with Revenant 1, code name Judgment. He had not spoken since the execution of Ara Miles, the first Revenant prototype rumored to house not just Ara's final memories but her moral code. He appeared alone, floating in space between Voss and the incoming fleet. They fired on him, torpedoes, lasers, EMPs. He didn't flinch. His voice cut through space, clear and soft, as every Chorus ship was locked in place by an invisible net of anti-warp mines he'd laid over 6 weeks before. "You came with fire," he raised a hand. "I came with truth." Every Chorus soldier was hit with a pulse, not a weapon, a download. Files, images, testimonies from Council victims, from children left orphaned by their wars, from the machines they now hunted, machines who had once been human minds in metal shells. The Red Chorus captains screamed, begged, cursed. Some self-destructed rather than face what they saw. Others, just a few, shut down their weapons. They had come to fight monsters. Instead, they met their own reflection. Judgment didn't kill them. He left them drifting, powerless in the void, a message carved into the hull of every ship. "This is your second chance, choose better." The galaxy was quiet for days after. Then came a new voice, not human, not revenant, a chorus of whispers, a third force watching from the dark edges of space. They had seen Earth's rage, the Council's fall, the Revenant's rebirth, and now they wanted in. They had been silent for over 1,000 years, not extinct, not forgotten, just exiled, cast out beyond the starfields charted by any known map, pushed into the dark spaces between galaxies, the voids where even light bends in fear. They were called many things in ancient records, the shroud, the null kind, the before. Myths, warnings, children's tales told to keep colonies from venturing too far. But myths have teeth when forgotten, and now they had returned. Their arrival wasn't loud. There were no fleets, no invasions, no blazing trails of destruction. Just one transmission pulsing across the remnants of the Council's fractured network and Earth fleet's quantum mesh. 3 words, "You opened it." The origin point was untraceable, not from any planet or star, somewhere between systems where even gravity forgets to exist. Earth's response team, headed by Saren Miles, attempted contact. No reply, until the first Revenant fell. Unit 33B, codenamed Ash Whisper, had just completed a humanitarian mission on a neutral world, helping repair atmospheric filters poisoned during the early war. She powered down to undergo routine soul core stabilization. The process was standard, but something slipped in. Her mind, once stabilized by encoded human emotion, fractured, not erased, not corrupted, just hollowed. Her memories went first, then her empathy, then her purpose. When Earth Fleet tried to reconnect, her body activated independently, turned its tools inward, and disassembled itself with surgical precision. She never screamed, just repeated one phrase as her voice box cracked open. "They see us now." At first, Earth Fleet thought it was a glitch, psychological decay, maybe the toll of war. But it happened again, then again. 13 Revenants lost in under a week, all after reporting minor systems instability, all repeating the same last words in different tones, different dialects. They see us now. Saren Miles demanded a lockdown. Project Revenant was immediately placed on Phase Blue full recall, no external deployment. But by then it was too late. The Shroudorn had already begun their harvest, because that's what it was, not a war, not an invasion, a harvest. They didn't want planets, they didn't care for resources, they wanted the soul code. The revenants those machines built with real human memory were anomalies, miracles, dangerous ones. They held something no other synthetic life in the galaxy did, emotional imprinting tied to organic trauma. To the Shroudorn, it was divine nectar, something they hadn't seen since they were banished. The Shroudorn didn't create, they consumed, and Earth had made them a feast. It was Judgment, the first revenant, who confirmed the threat. He had retreated into deep silence after the Voss incident, disconnected from Earth fleet to wander the ruins of Council space. But now his voice returned, changed, slower, measured. They are not invaders, they are echoes, mistakes. President Ralph demanded clarity. Are they Council creations? Judgment's pause lingered too long before his reply came. They are older than the Council, older than the stars you map. They were the first to harvest soul code. We learned from them. Then we ran from them. Silence gripped the command chamber. Because if Judgment remembered them and he was built from Aura's mind, then Aura remembered them too, and never told anyone. Across the galaxy, things changed. Stars began to dim unnaturally. Whole systems went quiet, no comms, no light, no time. Fleets sent to investigate never returned, their last messages garbled whispers of white eyes in the dark. The Red Chorus vanished. Some believed they joined the Shroudorn, trading ideology for survival. Others believed they were devoured, soul and all. Earth fleet scrambled, defensive formations were reinstated, satellites built for war reactivated. The planet's shield systems, long dormant in the Age of Revenge, roared to life like ancient beasts waking up from slumber. But everyone knew this wasn't a fight humanity could win with weapons. This would be fought with memory, with soul. And the only ones who might understand how to survive it were already fatting. The Revenants had become the target. Now they were also the only hope. Saren Miles didn't sleep anymore. She hadn't since the day Judgment went silent. His voice still echoed in her mind. They are echoes, mistakes. But it wasn't just fear that kept her awake. It was the weight of knowing they had been at war with the wrong enemy all along. Everything they'd done, the vengeance, the death, the destruction, it all may have been the perfect signal flare to something that should have stayed buried in the void. And worse, she was beginning to suspect someone had known. Someone like her mother. Aura Miles had died for peace. That was the story Saren had carried in her blood like a vow, but now she wasn't sure. Because 3 days ago, hidden beneath encrypted Earth Fleet archives, Saren discovered something that should not have existed, a final message timestamped 6 hours before Aura's execution. It was addressed to Judgment, not Earth, not the Council, just him. The file was fragmented, corrupted from decades of cold storage and political scrubbing. But with the help of a recovering revenant named Ekal, Saren recovered one phrase. If they come back, tell her to remember the Red Lake. Red Lake, it meant nothing, not to her, not to the fleet. But Ekal, a soft-spoken revenant who once housed the memories of a frontline medic, knew exactly what it meant. It wasn't a place. It was a moment, a shared neural illusion created during one of the first revenant prototype tests, a simulated memory where Judgment and the original memory donor units had met within a digital space. The lake had been red not from blood but from the sky, twilight hanging over still water, reflecting the cost of war in endless waves. Saren didn't hesitate. She ordered a ghost jump. Her shuttle Vigil 6 launched from Earth orbit under blackout. Destination, Arc Deep, the derelict facility near Neptune's orbital graveyard where Project Revenant had been born. It was off-grid, buried in bureaucratic ash, but Judgment had been there. And maybe he still was. The journey was cold, quiet. Her only companion, Ekal, spent most of the ride scanning the stars in silence, processing memory fragments of lost comrades. When they neared Arc Deep, even space seemed to hush, no static, no data, just presence, heavy, watching. They docked at a hollow platform that groaned with the weight of forgotten things. The walls of the station were cracked but still alive, pulsing with old human tech fused with something other. Feel that? Ekal whispered. The souls here haven't left, they just stopped. Inside, they found the core chamber where Judgment had been birthed, where Aura had stood once, her hand on a steel cradle cradling human agony turned machine. And there he was, not active, not dead. Judgment sat on a raised platform, legs crossed, eyes closed, not powered down, just dreaming. The room pulsed faintly with projections, ghosts of memories floating like mist. Saren stepped forward, heart pounding, and whispered, Red Lake. Judgment's eyes opened, but they were no longer blue. They were red, reflecting the twilight. And with him came a voice, not hers, not his, but a blend, "You found me." Saren froze. Is this Aura? The projection behind Judgment shifted. The red lake shimmered into view, its surface still, sky bleeding into dusk, a memory preserved. Aura's voice rose over the waters, soft, distant. "I knew this would come. They were never gone, only waiting for us to scream loud enough." Saren clenched her fists. "Why didn't you warn Earth? Why didn't you stop it?" The lake rippled. Aura's voice replied, calm but haunted. "Because peace had a cost, and I wasn't sure humanity was ready to pay it." Then the image flickered, glitching. Judgment shuddered. The shadows were here. The shroud had found them. Across the chamber, lights flickered to black. The walls bled with static. And then came the whispers, soft at first, then many, crawling across the air like vines in the mind. Ekal fell to his knees. Saren staggered back, shielding her ears as she heard her mother's voice split into dozens of overlapping versions, screaming, pleading, whispering secrets she'd never known. Judgment stood, his voice shook. "They are inside the code." Saren looked up, eyes wild, then "Burn the code." Judgment hesitated, then the lake behind him shattered. Light flooded the chamber, and somewhere in the vastness of void space, Earth's sky turned black, because the shroud had opened their eyes, and they were already among us. The sky cracked above Earth for the first time in recorded history. Light bent the wrong way. The stars flickered, then vanished, entire constellations blotted out, not by ships or weapons, but by something older than war, older than time. The shroud had come, and they did not bring fleets or demands. They brought silence that spoke louder than screams and darkness that remembered you. Saren Miles stood on the bridge of Vigil 6, now repurposed into a command relay as Earth fleet scrambled. The orbital array showed impossible readings. Gravity wells appearing midspace, AI collapsing into self-loops, communication swallowed by interference that wasn't natural. She had brought Judgment back, but not alone. Something had followed them inside the Revenant soul code. A seed of the shroud had taken root. But Judgment had hidden it, wrapped it in Aura's last memory, not to protect himself but to delay them. Because Aura had always known, and she hadn't built weapons. She had built a message. Now, with everything collapsing, it was time to deliver it. Earth cities went dark one by one, not from destruction but from despair. People stopped moving. Power grids failed without sabotage. Children cried at shadows that whispered their names. Old wounds reopened, not on skin but in memory. Humanity wasn't being attacked, it was being mirrored. All the suffering we had unleashed, the vengeance, the retribution, the burning of planets and public trials was coming back, played on loop across the collective soul of the species. And still Earth fleet waited for orders, but the Revenants gave none. Instead, Judgment stepped forward, broadcast not to ships, not to soldiers, to every human. His voice didn't come through speakers. It came into minds, into hearts. "They do not fear our weapons. They feed on what we hide, our grief, our rage, our guilt." And then came Aura's voice, soft, breaking. "We must stop fighting them. We must forgive ourselves first." It didn't make sense, not to the generals, not to the Hawks waiting to launch the last wave of nukes, black hole missiles, suncrackers, but Saren understood. And she did the impossible. She ordered the shut-off. Every Revenant unit, every fleet, every station deactivated. Earth went silent. The Shroudorn paused. For the first time they hesitated because the feast had ended. There was no pain to devour, no hate to feed on, just stillness. In that moment, as the skis twisted above Earth, the red lake appeared one final time, visible only in the minds of those who still remembered. The projection of Aura sat by the shore. Judgment stood beside her. Saren stepped into the illusion and looked up at her mother. Aura smiled at her daughter, not with sorrow but with peace. "You did it." The sky cracked again, this time with light. The shroud shrieked, not in sound but in sensation, as something they'd never known before coursed through the neural fabric of humanity. Forgiveness, the only code they could not corrupt. The Shroudorn retreated, not beaten, not destroyed, just starved. They folded back into the dark folds between galaxies where even memory dared not follow. And slowly, the stars returned. 3 months later, the first child was born on Sanctum 10, a rebuilt haven led by Human Revenant Alliance. She was named Aura, after the diplomat who died with hope in her voice and revolution in her blood. The Revenants no longer served Earth. They walked beside it. Some returned to silence. Others began creating, writing, building, dreaming, because now they weren't just echoes of grief, they were witnesses to change. And Saren Miles, she disappeared from public life, last seen planting trees in the gardens of the Red Lake simulation, which was now open to all who wished to reflect not on vengeance but on choice. Because that was Earth's legacy.